Welcome to another episode of Soulstenance. In this episode, this is going to be a part one of a two-part series. In this first episode, Joe and I dive into a very cool topic about the misconception that when we get to a certain age or achieve certain things, like a switch happens and we magically become this adult that has things figured out, and how much of a lie of the mind that is, how false that is. Uh, and in some ways, it's kind of humorous how untrue that is. And we explore that whole arena. It's very interesting in ways that we have gotten away from that and grown away from that, and silver linings, things we can learn, especially as it correlates to children, like getting to the younger generations and getting ahead of that misconception. Even in our culture, we're often asked at very young ages, what do you want to be when you grow up? And we get into a balance of work ethic and discipline and focus and goals, and taking the pressure off of ourselves, being kind to ourselves, opening up the idea of failing forward, and being able to change and pivot throughout life and realize that we never have it figured out. And that shouldn't even be in the equation. So very cool topic, a lot of value here, we think. The second part, which will come out the next week, gets more into the manifesting. Like, how do we balance all that? How do we balance the work ethic and the goals and the clarity and the discipline in the left brain with the right brain of manifesting this? Like, how do we do that and having wealth and abundance, but maintaining our values and our peace in the journey and all the changes and all the obstacles and the challenges and the struggles that come with that? Very cool topics. We had a lot of fun today. So without further ado, we'll let you dive right into the first one, and hopefully you love it enough to jump into the second one. So enjoy and take care.
One of the things that came out in the conversation, which I thought was really interesting, that I do want to talk about at some point in the future, or now, was this idea of like feeling like in adulthood it would be more consistent than it is, or like that when I grow up, like I'd know who I was, and then I just like play that out. Like that was kind of like my idea, probably into my 20s, and then I was entered this stage of frustration that that wasn't the case, that that
It's
wasn't how
interesting.
it was playing out. Like, um, I thought, I thought adults knew who they were and
Hmm.
had clarity on like what they were about, what their job was going to be, what their roles in life were, um, and
That's funny.
and and I think that's pretty common. And then I think there's this, but we don't talk about it for whatever reason. And then for me, I experienced like this genuine phase of like mourning, frustration, anger at life that it wasn't working out like that, that I hadn't matured into that adult. Um, that adult that I now know doesn't exist. But I thought like that was the pattern. That's what happened with, that's what adulthood was in my young estimation. And then, and then there's frustration around like that not being the case, and feeling broken, feeling lost, feeling like everybody else had it figured out, but I didn't, and didn't know how to put that into language. So I wasn't having these conversations with people at that point. I think at this point, I easily could have a conversation with my father or other people that were in my life at that point about learning who I was, being present in the now, like this ongoing, like developing being and becoming. But I didn't have the language for it then. It was just frustrating and confusing. And I thought, like we often do, I thought I was the only one going through that. I thought, you know, my
Silly.
experience was unique in that way. Like other people knew who they were and had it figured out and had, whatever. And, but I think it's really curious that that is such a common misconception. And also curious that there's like this time period where even if we wanted to talk about it, because I was somebody who did seek um, mentors, other people's insight, counselors. I was very proactive in trying to understand my situation in life, trying to conceptualize, verbalize, like, get my head around that. And it still wasn't, those weren't conversations that were happening. I couldn't have wrapped my head around like what I just said, even though it looks so clear looking back now. It's just like, oh yeah, that was what was happening. Um, and I think that's really interesting that that seems to be a consistent phase that we as humans go through in this transition of our expectations of life further on, our expectations in our teenage years, childhood, adolescence, and then this long period, and maybe there's people who don't come out of this long period of frustration and trying to adapt to what we discover is reality. Um, and I went through a period of not accepting that was actually what reality was going to be. I was like, something's broken in the system. Something's broken in me. So there's some misalignment here, because I was so clear that this is what it was supposed to be, and it wasn't. Um, no, it's a really interesting like form or layer that seems to be on our just our trajectory or
Yeah.
this journey.
I think it's
And how,
fascinating.
yeah.
Well, I didn't mean to interrupt there. I thought you were
No,
done.
go
There was
jump
a
in. I was
pause.
gonna probably say the same thing over again, just a little differently.
Well, I was curious. I'm totally down to run with this topic, and I think this is great. Is I wanted to know, where do you think you got that model of the world from? Where do you think that came from? That
Great
belief that it
question.
should be X, Y, Z.
Yeah, I've thought about this a lot. I don't know exactly.
Hmm.
Like it. I think this is one of the pieces that's so curious to me about it. Is it seems like it came from within. Like it wasn't. I mean, I'm sure the movies and books and just the life around me were
Parents,
participatory
culture.
for
Yeah.
sure. But I don't think that was ever said to me in any way. I don't know a human that would say that. Uh,
But yet so
because
many think it, which is
but
interesting.
so many things because it's such a lie. Like you
Yeah.
can't say it. Like I don't think I like our bodies let us say it, but so many of us think it, and I feel like we help each other uphold it
Mm.
in a way, even though we don't ever actually verbalize it or get down to like, is that what we're talking about? Is that what we're saying? That we think it's just gonna work out and be easy or be this thing. Um, and so it's kind of like this.
Huh.
It
This is
I don't know.
fascinating.
In a way, it kind of feels like an elephant in the room, but it's in everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And yet we don't talk about it. And I didn't even feel like I had the words or the space to talk about it before. So there's a piece of that that feels necessary. Going meta, going higher on that, like that seems necessary to our growth journey. That confusion, that frustration, but it seemed so complex while I was experiencing it. And looking back, it seemed really simple what was going on. It was just like a confusion or a misunderstanding or like trying to make this script that I had that no one gave me, but that I have and feels right, like trying to force that onto the life I was experiencing. And this angst with the separation in between what I thought was supposed to be and what was. And I think in some small way, like the majority of friction we experience in transition in life is a playing out of that story in a similar way too. Like, oh, this is happening, not what I expected.
Mm.
Ugh. You know.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah, I think this is quite an interesting topic. I think one glaring red alarm like example of this is when we're in school and we're young and our brains aren't even halfway formed yet. And culturally in schools and parents, and what do you want to be when you grow up? What do you want to be when you grow up? And
mm,
it's like, I
mm,
don't know. Superman? Like, most people I know don't know in their 20s and their 30s, and they change and they have a midlife crisis. And then some people in their 40s and they're so like, I either don't know what I want to do or I hate what I do. very few, I feel, very few actually knew, wrote it out, and were like mostly, yeah, I just knew. I think I've met one person like that in my life,
Mm-hmm.
maybe two.
Very rare.
So I think that's like an example. I mean, I don't know. I mean, there's a collective consciousness influence that's like invisible that maybe stems from the ego or older generations wanting younger generations to like do better and somehow thinking that might be the part of the answer. I think
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of what ifs here. But I think it's interesting in the sense that I think it is not it's mostly not beneficial because we are such evolving creatures, and when we go back to the being and not the doing, that's just another premise off the doing. And I suffered a lot as well. Of I don't have XYZ, I haven't achieved XYZ, all these things, shame, broken, not enough, all these things of, and literally people telling me that, people that I live with, like close friends at points in time. Remember one, our friendship had kind of strained and flat out judgment, straight up judging me. I don't even know if she knew what she was doing, but she just said like, yeah, well, you've changed careers and you're kind of, and I remember like, wow, like you have no idea the life I'm living. If I look at all the most successful people I look up to, business people, entrepreneurs, creators, people that changed industries, they shifted a lot. Almost, I mean, you probably know this metric. Most millionaires have been bankrupt at least once or twice.
Oh yeah.
Some crazy statistic.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Trial and error. It's trial and error. And I think there's that cultural piece that's tied to what we're talking about of you should know. It should be this like straight line. And that's just a lie.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the more we accept that and chill out on that and allow us to be human and make mistakes, fail forward, learn, figure things out, change careers multiple times if you need to.
Mm-hmm.
I think it really is like a medicine for the ego that can have very suffering based reactions to that not being what it should be, which is a lie, in my opinion. So I like you bringing this up because I've had a lot of experience with it. And I think your point too, most people are like, with a few that are experiencing this, another lie. 99.9% of, whatever
An
humans are doing
incredibly
this.
common lie. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that one's fascinating to start jumping in. That's fascinating to me how that continues to come up in my life. Like the
Mm,
reality, I still catch myself thinking like I'm the only one experiencing it, or I'm the only one feeling like whatever it is, you know.
mm, yeah.
Um, and I'm so aware of other, you know, and I'm consistently surrounded by seeing that there's others in dealing with my clients and dealing like the majority of friendships I have are, I don't know, very deep, very reflective, very involved in each other's lives, and so I am often seeing like the struggle that's going on in other people's lives too, and yet I still slip into that silly idea. It just grabs me that I'm in this little, this little 1% bubble or tinier than that. That just like I'm the only one experiencing this
Yeah.
ecosystem or whatever, and that's I don't stay there
Huh.
very long or a whole lot shorter time period than I used to when that comes up, but it's just interesting to me that it still pops up. Something that I've wrestled with so many times and have felt like my body would have learned that by now. My mind would have learned that that's not the case. Uh, and it still pops up. But going back to what we were talking about earlier, just I love that you brought up the idea of like the different energies too, like the being and doing. And I do think there is I wonder how much of this is cultural and how it shifts in different cultures with different emphasis on other things. Obviously, our culture is very career oriented, very doing oriented,
Yeah.
um, and which is neat in a lot of ways around the creation stuff. But
Yeah.
I think it's easy to get sidetracked in that's that's the most important energy or the only energy is, that energy of doing. And I think that's probably where some of the conflict was, is like, I thought adulthood was like a more consistent doing of things, and I didn't realize this being part was continuous. Like I had to consistently decide who I'm gonna be. And I think that's where so much of the conflict happens, is we don't start at an early age modeling and focusing on who we want to be in any given situation, in any doing. Who do we want to be consistently? And I think that's been very clarifying in my more recent years. It's just as far as like what I'm spending my energy on is much more the being, um, and doing whatever shows up, next in my journey as options. Um,
Yeah, I love that. I think
mm,
several things came up when you said that. I think I have a lot of empathy for that too, and I'm definitely still not immune to it, despite how much awareness I have of it and how much I've grown through that. And it still hits me sometimes, and it fascinates me. I think it's also tied into with. I think this is just humans. I don't think this has to do with any
yeah.
specific culture. I've seen it every culture I've ever and country I've ever visited. I see this. I think it's a human thing. It's why we have gum, we have breath mints, why we dress a certain way, why we have people get a hair done and tans and all makeup and all these things. We always do our best to look and appear strong and together. It's very ingrained into every culture I've ever been to, and I think it's
Mm-hmm.
tied into it's all interconnected. And I think it comes back to vulnerability. Like it really is. It's like it's vulnerable to fail. It's vulnerable to change careers when there's a culture that everyone's like, "Whoa, like you should have it figured out right now and have a house with a picket fence and 2.5 kids. What's wrong with you?" May not be said, but it's like sometimes you can just feel that invisible energy of maybe if it's not as a judgment, just like a little aversion or a little something there.
Mm-hmm.
Could be a mind read, but I think there is that like we want to present ourselves the best, we want to look the best, be strong in all these things that are the opposite of just being like, hey, we're all human, we all go to the bathroom, we all cough, sneeze, burp, pee, poop, we all have to sleep, we all want to be loved, we all need to eat food, we all need shelter, like we're all wildly vulnerable in this fleshy little body that can get sick and all these things. Yet, for some weird reason, as humans, it's like we're taught, or it's like, no, you just need to hide all that.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, but that's not real. Like, that is an inevitable part of every human's life. So, why would having a certain career or thinking I'm going to have it figured out as an adult, like, why would that be some weird anomaly of truth to this whole thing that is ever present? And I think another point is that I sometimes will actually smile and laugh out loud to myself, thinking about how adults are just kids in older, bigger bodies. And it's like we think that time like automatically ages us, matures us, and like brings inherent wisdom and stability. And it's just not even true. It's hilarious how untrue that is. And I think that also is another element, another aspect of what you're saying. And I think it's just really good to be aware of it. I think the more we're aware of it, consistently, almost as a habit, whether a thought or like a state or some weird disempowering thing happens in our system, like, oh yeah, back to mindfulness. That's a thought. It's happening, but it's probably not true.
Mm-hmm.
And this arena, I think it's almost always not true.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, well, then, okay, let that go. And I think the beauty of that is that when we get that habit, like you and I been living this way for years now, it opens you up to create, to take risk, calculated
Mm-hmm.
risk, to try new things, to grow, to evolve, to like manifest dreams, essentially.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean you get it, but the journey's better than the destination anyway, as we've talked about. So I think this is a really cool thing to like acknowledge this as a lie,
Mm-hmm.
take off the pressure, allow
Mm-hmm.
yourself to be human. Cool. and then there's all this cool stuff you can do. So that's
Yeah.
one really cool like silver lining of this whole thing that I think makes the human experience way better once we just shed light on this stupid, silly little lie.
Hmm. That's
Yeah.
so valuable, and I concur. It's it's been helpful for me recently, and I've been thinking about this because I am curious at the causation and like how this comes up and why it's such a common thing we think
It's a
about
good point.
as humans. And yet, I've also realized that thought loop of looking for the causation, like trying to find somebody to blame, like isn't a necessary part of doing something else. It's not a necessarily a helpful step in choosing other. Um, like I see how easily I could get up in that, caught up in that energy of just like looking for the why and who to blame this on. And it's like, well, yeah, I'm here either way, though. Like that happened
Yeah.
either way. That's participated in the majority of humans I've ever had this conversation with. Actually, no one that I've deeply spoken about hasn't experienced some form of that illusion or that dream, that misunderstanding. And so it almost seems like innate, like this, regardless of family, regardless of culture, this might just be something we step into as a thought. This is a thought pattern, you know, in teenage years and 20s and early life, and just something we have to evolve out of. Um, but when I think about it like that, it helps me have grace for myself in experiencing that. It helps
Yeah.
me step outside of the blame of like, why did it take me so long to like get there, or why is that still coming up, or I'm curious about it, and I think that's healthy. I am interested. I would like
Hmm.
to know if there were things that added to that, if there were things, you know, in my childhood or in my development, or things that I could assist someone else with, maybe not treading that water as long as they could, or you know, helping guide somebody out of that, but also just having the grace for myself to realize like that was, there was a lot learned in that confusion. There was a lot of becoming that happened during that, um, and I don't know if there's other ways that that could have happened. I probably, but but I am but I am still curious to how consistent it is with so many people, and what is the best way to show up for each other. I'm damn sure it's not continuing to uphold this model of like, uh, it is easy for me and it does just work out, and like that it's not a continually daily being and becoming. Um, I think there's a simplicity to it I experience at this point in my life that I that I sure didn't earlier. But it's not easy. Looking inward,
That's
being
interesting.
present, um,
Hmm.
having times of checking in with myself, being quiet, and
Hmm.
following our intuition, like all those things. There's a simplicity to them. Um, but they're really easy not to do. What was that? What was the book we read? That was like the main point. Easy to do, easy not to do. Um,
I don't remember.
I forget the name of that book. But yeah,
Yeah, I can't think of.
what'd
I
that
can't
bring
think of
up
the
for
name.
you?
Well, I was curious about. You said it's simple but not easy, and it seems like. Are you saying more like the discipline's not easy, or like the doing, or both, or just kind of
I think it is a bit of both. Like it's
yeah?
maybe what I mean to say more is it's easy not to do. Like
Okay,
the actual
that makes
steps are
more sense.
simple, but it's very easy not to do them. It's very easy
Yeah.
not to be present. It's very easy to not show
Hmm.
up,
Yeah.
to just coast. And I think that's a better way to say it, because
Yeah.
um, because the habits themselves are incredibly supporting, and
Mm.
um, and even fun and joyful a lot of the time. Like when we're in that flow, you know, the
Yeah.
meditation, the breath work, even the ice plunge, you know, like that gets to be something that's pretty enjoyable.
Yeah.
I
In a really weird way.
I really do. It is weird because
Yeah.
there's a part of it that's
For
uncomfortable
most
every
people.
time.
Yep.
Um, but I
Oh
notice
yeah,
it when I
yeah.
don't do it. Like
Yep.
it's missed. Um,
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
and for me, there's a connection with the joy and the out of that when I'm missing something. When I'm like, man, that's
Mm,
noticeably not here, and it was a good thing. It's like, man, but it's easy not to do. It's easy not to get into that cold
yeah.
plunge. It's easy not to do that breath work. It's easy not to go to the gym, um, not meditate,
Yep.
not listen to your
Yeah.
gut.
I
Um,
agree with that. Yeah, I think several points come up. The first thing is like to what you're saying, like even if something's I think it gets these things get easier over time
hmm,
and it never makes them easy. I think that's we could use that word in different ways. I think to
yeah.
your point, like there's always that we've talked about it many times, always that little voice that's just
Hmm,
waiting. David Goggins talks so much about this. That little voice that's just waiting to creep in and like, oh, he's getting a little comfortable. And I think the more we get it, the easier it is to kind of keep that voice quiet where it's like, yeah, okay, I don't really have a he's not going to listen to me, but I can still try. That's just the balance I think we're always dancing on, it's a fine line.
hmm,
But it can become easy in ways
hmm,
because then that habit's like subconsciously wired into us. It's our system's used to it, and then we start falling in love with all the beautiful things despite how freaking cold or hard or
hmm.
boring meditation could be boring for some people. There's different things. So I like that you said that. I think that's a good point. I think what's interesting too of your curiosity with like I don't need to know the answer. I think it's a healthy curiosity. Um Something came up for me where I was like, okay, what's the value of this? Like, okay, hypothetically, I've already suffered for many, many years in this principle. I suffer with it very little now, but it still pops its head up sometimes and it's usually fleeting. Like it's usually almost always a minute, maybe a few minutes, which is astonishing because it used to be days, weeks, or months in my past. And it's just like, it's quick now. Like it comes up and I'm like, you silly goose. Nope, because I'm oriented in my values, because I've learned so much about this from like, you are a lie and you're a primitive part of my system that's trying to protect me from things. And we are outdated in the modern world where I see what you're doing. Thank you for trying to help me, mind. But you're not helping me. And it just, boom, it's gone. And so I think there's a big part of knowing yourself as well that just like, you silly goose, like I know who I am, nice try, to whatever part of the ego is trying to like, oh, but wait, protect. So that's interesting. But then I take it further and I'm like, well, what's the point of even trying to figure this out? Whatever healthy curiosity is there, what's the benefit? Because I think I'm pretty good with this now. Um, but then that ties me to children and younger generations where they have years or decades of potential suffering with this.
Hmm.
And if we can help teach younger humans, especially with a culture that not maliciously, not blame, I think it's mostly unconscious,
Yeah,
of
for
like,
sure.
and parents, I think there's another side I want to hit too, but I think to finish that is if we can help kids young, like, hey, dude, like, what are the benefits? Why? Okay, well, you can save them from chemical stress doing harm to their immune system and how and the quality of their life. You can help from any potential emotional or mental problems, challenges, chronic issues, or diagnoses that might come up. You can help them from hundreds of hours of suffering. You can reduce shame. You can reduce guilt. You can reduce very limiting beliefs that needn't not be there. And I think that's the like, what's the point of even talking about this? I think that's the gold right there. For adults, a lot harder, especially as we age. The time's already happened and we're more ingrained in our ways. It's harder to change people in certain ways that are older. So I think that's a big piece. I have another piece where I'm like, okay, former engineers coming in here and people that I know that have children that are like very, very hard workers and go getters. That side's like, dude, get busy, get it done. I don't have time for this. Like, and there's another beautiful side of that that's like, no, we want structure. We need goals. We need a plan. We need you to be working towards something. I don't want you just floating out in the wind being like, hey, well, it doesn't really matter what I'll do. I'll change in a year. I think there's a healthy balance. I think the beautiful part of all this, from my perspective is this, especially at younger ages. And I got to give Gary Vee some credit. He has an intense way of saying these things, but I think he's been a beautiful influence in younger generations with this message is you have time, in a sense, when you're especially in your teens and 20s. You have some time. It flies by, but you have time. Don't get all worked up with severe stress, anxiety, and panic and like depression because you're freaking out because you think you should have it figured out. That's a lie. So why is this important and how do we find the balance? Have a goal. Know what you're aiming towards. Aim for it as long as it's resonant with your values. A little bit trickier to explain that to kids, but I think it can be. And it's like have something to work, like build good work ethic, build good values, build discipline. Like that's all very healthy. Have that there, but don't beat yourself up and tear yourself down because you haven't attained XYZ in an unrealistic time frame. And if that's just not what it ends up being, what you do, you might change 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 times. That's okay, especially in a modern world where technology is rapidly changing so much.
Yeah.
And traditional careers are disintegrating before our eyes. Like, it's okay. So I think that's where the balance comes in. Like, take unneeded pressure off, work, show up, go towards something, aim, and allow yourself to change it without the guilt and shame. And I think that can just increase humanity's frequency and health and longevity and creativity and joy. And I think that's when I zoom out, I really see that as the use case for even us having this conversation. So, yeah,
I hear
that's
that.
what comes up. Yeah.